Now, a big focus of this website is learning about databases, how they work, why they're so important. And if you've never worked with a database before, let me go ahead and give you a quick intro. So a database is a place to store lots of information in a very structured way. Databases have what are called tables, and then those tables have lots of rows or pieces of information about different things. So I think a great way to think about this is to use object-oriented programming, and that's a fancy term to refer to using classes and objects. So for example, in Python, you can have a class to represent an object, and then that class is going to have properties in it that represent different things about the objects that you're trying to create. But there's the class, which is sort of the blueprint, and then there's the objects, which you can create tons of those, and those have different qualities. If we talk about this in the database world, the classes are tables, and then the objects are the rows inside of the database. So for example, if we go ahead and look at what we're trying to build, here on the home page, we're going to list out different portfolio projects. And what is a portfolio project? Like, what does it consist of? Well, it has an image, it has a title, it has a description about what it is, and it even sometimes has a URL. You notice how the little finger changes here? Like, I've made it so that some of these can be clickable, some of them are not. So if we were using Python to represent these, we'd make a project class, and then these would be the different properties. Well, if we want to do this with a database, we would have to make a table, and then within that table say, these are the different attributes. But the magic of Django is that it takes away all the complexity of working with the database, of making these tables and inserting the rows and updating them, all that stuff. It does it for us. And in fact, it does it in a very familiar view. We just have to create a class that inherits from a special class that Django's made for us that basically does all that work for us in the background. It is really amazing, okay? So that is what we're trying to create. Let's go ahead and move back into our project and talk about models. So let's move into our portfolio app here, because we're going to be creating a model for those projects, these things that are going to be listed here on the home page. So let's go ahead and go into the portfolio folder, and we want to go to this models.py, okay? So you can see it started for us a little bit here. It's got this lowercase models here that's been imported. This is what's going to help us create a model, which is essentially the class to represent a project, okay? So let's go ahead and delete this comment here. I'm going to make a new class, and this is just like making a Python class, and I'm going to give it a name. So in this case, I'm trying to represent these portfolio projects. Let's just call it a project, okay? So I'm going to do capital project, just like this, and then in the parentheses, I have to say lowercase models, which was imported up here, dot capital model, and then I'm going to do the colon. Okay, so what this does is it inherits from this model class, which Django has made for us, which this is necessary because this is going to help it interact with the database, make a table for us, and bring things in and out. And now it's time to add properties here. Now, typically with this, you would just normally say something like a project has a title, and you would say this thing is just a string like this. But when we're working with Django in creating models, which a model is basically a way to say a class that's going to be working with the database, it's not this simple. We have to be a little bit more specific about what we want that property to be. So in this case, for example, with the title, yes, we want it to be a string, but what particular type of string? Well, in this case, this is where Django's documentation really comes in handy. So go ahead and just Google something like Django model fields, something like that. And look at this, Django model field reference. This is perfect. So this is some documentation here from Django, and here you can see the different types of fields that you can have. So for example, if you go on this side here and just click on field types, it will scroll you down to where you need to. These are all the different things that you can add into a model. So for example, Boolean, that's recognizable, right? That's something that you could add. Char field, this is actually what we do want. This is one way to represent a string. There's other ways too, like char field's more for, as it says, small to large size strings. Whereas if we scroll down, I believe it's called text field. Let's see if we can find that. Man, so many different types here. Here we go, text field for a large text field. Okay, so there's different things here, but look, there's stuff to represent time. We're gonna need a URL eventually, like that's one of them. But let's go ahead and start with this char field, okay? So if you ever need to add a field or a property to a class, go ahead and reference this document. And so let's start first by copying char field. We're We're going to go back to our code and say title is equal to, and we do this lowercase models. Everything is happening through this code that we've imported. We're going to say models dot and do that capital char field. Now, inside of the parentheses here, we can add a little bit of customization. So for example, with this char field, we can say we only want the title to be so many words. Like, for example, if we go back to this homepage here, it'd be really bad if, our title got really big and had lots of words. So we can actually limit that by saying we only want it to be a certain amount. And so the way that we can do that is if we go back to the documentation here, you can see there's an option to say max length is equal to something. So in our case, we're going to say, all right, our max underscore length is equal to, and let's just maybe say 100. That means there can never be more than 100 characters in the titles for these projects, okay? So boom, that's done. Let's go ahead and add something else. A project has a description as well as a title. So let's go ahead and go back. I think this is also going to be a char field. So I'm just going to copy and paste this down below, but change this to description. And let's go ahead and say that with the description, we want this to be longer, but not all that big. Maybe let's do something like 250 characters, right? We should be able to explain some, but we don't want this to be a massive like blog post, for instance. It's a quick summary of what we did on that particular project, okay? So we have those two things represented, but what about the image? How are we going to do that? Well, if we go back to the documentation here, there is a field called image field, okay? And if we scroll down here, you know what, I'm just going to search for it, image field. There it is. So we can go ahead and copy this guy, come back, and I'm going to just simply say that image, that seems like a fine name for what it is that we're trying to accomplish, models dot image field, and then we'll have our parentheses here. Now, with this image, there's a lot of different things that we can do here. And in fact, you can see like, whoa, there's, a lot of different things we can specify, like the height, the width, how big it's going to be, stuff like that. But in this case, the one really important one here is the upload to. We can have these images that are a part of these projects being uploaded to a particular place. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this upload to. And I'm going to come back and paste this in the image field and say that this is going to be equal to, and you've got to pick some sort of name for the folder that you want these stored in. So similarly to like we did with the templates, like, if we were inside of the generator app, we would say generator folder and then templates and then have eventually what we wanted. I'm going to go and say the name of our app here, portfolio, and then I'm going to do a slash, and then I'm going to have images inside of here with an ending slash. Now, it's important to note, this is just the way I've decided to do this, because eventually what's going to happen is there's going to be a folder here called media, and if we just put, for example, yes, if that was the name of our folder, all of our images would be uploaded to media/yes. And that's totally fine. You can use whatever naming convention that you'd like. Personally, I like doing something like this because it keeps things organized. It's like, okay, within the media, there's, the portfolio folder, which belongs to the portfolio app. And then within that, these are the images that are part of that app. You can totally decide how you want to work with this, but to me, that makes a lot of sense. All right. The last thing that we need in our model is a URL. As you noticed, some of these things are clickable, some of them are not. And so we're going to go back to our reference here. Let's search for URL field. Look at that, came up the first time. Let's go ahead and copy this. The reason I really like to copy this is because if you have any sort of spelling mistake here, it's not going to work. I mean, you'll probably notice in the error that you get inside of your terminal, but why not just, make sure we get it right the first time? So I'm going to say URL is equal to models.URL field with the parentheses. And then if we go ahead and check inside of here, I don't think I need to provide any sort of max length on the URL. I think that could be totally whatever it wants. But we do have the one issue of that, I want people to be able to decide whether or not there's going to be a URL for a project, right? Because, some of these things are clickable, some of them are not. So how do we represent that inside of our model? So the way that we do that is we just say blank is equal to capital true. So blank is a property that we could add to anything here. Like if we wanted to add it to the title, make the title optional, we could say comma, and then just do, blank equal to true like this. You can just hit comma and keep adding different things here. But I'm only going to apply it to the URL because that's the one thing that I want to say, you don't necessarily need this. By default, blank is equal to false, but like I said, you could add it anywhere. Okay, so I know this video is getting long here. We're going to wrap it up soon, but with this model, we've done all this information. We've made this class. How do we add this to our database? That's the whole point of creating this, is so that eventually we would make a table inside of our database. So the way to do that is move to our terminal. And you'll notice if we go to our terminal, we have an error here. And basically this is saying, if you read more into this, we have to install this thing called Pillow. So anytime we're going to be working with images, basically this code here from this image field, if you're going to be using this, you have to install something called Pillow. And it even shows you here, hey, you just got to, do the pip install Pillow. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-C to stop the server. And I'm going to say pip3 install Pillow. Okay, all lowercase. And then it's going to go out, grab that, bring it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and run that server one more time. And if we do that, you can see we've got a little message here. So, and you've seen this message before. This thing in red, it says, you have 17 unapplied migration. Your project may not work, but you have to apply these things. You may be thinking, what the heck is this? Anytime you make a edit or a change or something new to your models, it's called a migration, and those things need to be migrated into the database. That's basically, migrating means I'm telling the database that there's a new table, or I'm changing something about a table. And you may be saying 17, like, why is that here? Well, that's because we already have lots of apps in our project. If we go to our settings, look at all these installed apps. So these things, which are provided by Django, they have their own migrations that come with them. So the way to apply these migrations is you do a Control-C, then we do Python 3 manage.py, and then we're going to do migrate, just simply migrate. So Python 3 manage.py migrate. Okay, and you can see that went and did those 17 things. So now if I go ahead and hit run server, no longer does that error show up. It's pretty cool, right? We got rid of this error thing. But this actually doesn't know about our model changes that we just made. In fact, in order for the system to know about this, we have to do a Control-C. First, make sure that your model has been saved. So do like a Control-S or Command-S, then come back, and we are going to say Python 3 manage.py make migrations. This is the thing that I was accidentally typing in before. But make migration says, check any of my models.py files and see if there's new changes there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on this. And you'll notice when I did this, it said, hey, we found a migration for the portfolio app. It looks like you have a new model named project. And that's exactly the case. So now if we were to run our server, it says, hey, you have one unapplied migration. And how would we do that? Well, we'd hit Control-C and we do the Python 3 manage.py migrate. And if I go ahead and hit enter on this, you can see it's applied that one migration that we had. And now if I run the server, I get no errors. Okay. Now, if you ever have any questions about how these migrate files work or what they look like, if we go to our portfolio app, there's this new folder called migrations. And you can see this 0001 initial. And this basically was the migration that was created. It says, hey, this person's trying to create a new model called project, and these are the different things that should be inside of there. Now, let me mention, you should never edit these files by hand, okay? Technically you can, but it's a very advanced things. You should just leave these things alone. Really, the flow should be like, for example, let's say I want to change something like, I want title to be title man, okay? I go ahead and save that in my model, then I come back and I do a make migration. And look, it says, hey, are you trying to rename title to title man? And I say Y enter to say yes. And then it creates a new migration for me. You can see it's saying, oh, let's go ahead and change the name there. Now, I actually don't want to do this. So I'm going to select this file and I'm going to delete it. But I just wanted you to see the flow there. It's like anytime you want to make a new model, make a change to an existing model, make those changes, save it, and then do the make migrations, and then eventually migrate it. But you'll notice now, if I say like I want to migrate, or if I want to do make migrations, that's what I was actually looking for. Oh, and excuse me, I forgot to change this back. So I'm going to change this back to title just like that. And then I'm going to do my make migrations. Look at that. It says no changes detected. So it's saying everything's the same as before. So we're ready to move forward. All right. I know that was a long one and we didn't see anything tactile. We're going to fix that in the next lecture.